I think now is it's particularly appropriate that we're having discussions like this on the topic of Irish today, and past and present, or present and tomorrow, here in San Francisco. When you think of the Irish footprint in the United States, there is nowhere on the West Coast as Irish as San Francisco. Our history here goes back to the 1850s. It just so happens at the moment when they discovered gold in the hills, it was the same moment when we couldn't feed ourselves, and we travelled in great numbers here. And here has been a very special home to the Irish, and the language has travelled with us. And I suppose if there's one moment in history that I point to as being particularly significant for the Irish language and the connection with the Bay Area, it was the visit of Douglas de Hige on Seo when he was Uachtaráin Consul, the president of Consul in 1905. And during that visit, Hyde raised $10,000 for the Irish language, for supporting the Irish language back in Ireland. $10,000. Now, as it happened, that money didn't actually get back to Ireland because there was an earthquake here. And Hyde, when in New York, heard about the earthquake and said, "This money is great and it's important for the language, but the people of San Francisco need it more." And he sent the money back individually to everybody back here in the city. Now, what I've heard is subsequently the money was paid back to Conul Gaeilge, but I think that moment is an important one, the connectivity between Ireland, the Irish language, and San Francisco. I think it's particularly appropriate here because of the incredibly vibrant and motivated Irish community, Irish-speaking community here in the city. Last year I had the honour of speaking at the 18th Dara Seachtaine, which is organised by Sean Seamus here and a team. And I mean, that's an excellent event in terms of celebrating our language. The Conul Gaeilge here, I see Katrina Wheatler at the back of the room. Wherever there's an Irish language discussion, you know she's not far away from it. The passion that and of course Kyoto's here in the city, the passion that the speakers bring to the language keeps it alive here, 8,000 kilometres away from Ireland. I think it's appropriate as well that we're having a conversation now. Sin Blina Gaeilge, it's 125 years since the birth of Conul Gaeilge and the Irish revival movement. And I think these anniversaries, where their great value is in reflecting on what has come to pass, taking stock of the present, and then looking forward to the future and thinking about what type of, how to take things forward. And there is no doubt that there are, I'm sure it'll go on the panel today, there are massive challenges for the Irish language. There are massive challenges for all minority languages. But even, like, I come from having worked in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and in those communities, Arabic is under attack from English. I mean, the reality is it has become the lingua franca. We are blessed and cursed both by proximity to its birthplace, but it is such a strong language, and there are issues for Ireland, for the Irish, in terms of course funding, implementation legislation, but I think also there are important green shoots for the language, and I suppose there's maybe two things I just want to focus on briefly before I move stage left. I think it's, again, why it's appropriate here is because I think that the advent of social media and new technologies provides all sorts of new ways for people to connect with the language the way they want to. For a lot of us who grew up in Ireland, it was taught through textbooks in a very monosyllabic way, and now I think that there's all other ways that people can experience Irish and engage with it as they want. And I'm very encouraged when you hear that Duolingo has 2.3 million Irish downloads, and that 53% of them are here in the US, and that the drag queen RuPaul, who tweets in Irish, I'm sure is one of those. But also things like the podcasts, and anyone who hasn't downloaded Mother Folklore, please do. If you want to hear the history of the letter J in Irish and see what happened to it, it just means that there's so many more ways to engage in the parts of the language, the Chonga, that you love and that you feel part of. I think the other reason why I think that there's great optimism for the language is the passion for those who support the language. So I'm a dub, I'm not a counter Dukish, but my wife is. She's on the panel, Kiva, this evening. And I have spent an awful lot of time up in Donegal, up in Gweedore, where she's from, and I see how much the language is a part of who they are. And I felt that myself going to college. I mean, I went to school. I had parents who didn't speak the language at home. But for me, my Irishness has always been wrapped up in my use of the language and my knowledge of the language. And I think that even here, 8,000 kilometres away from home, I'm so humbled and impressed by the volunteers who, people like Imelda, who's here, and Mike, who I just met this week and just set up his new website, Katrina, Sean, all the crew who are out here and just bring that passion to it. And I think there's a great infection to that passion. It gets you interested, it gets you involved. And I think with that, the language always has a chance to survive and to thrive. So I'm honoured to be here with you this evening. I hope you have a fantastic evening. I hope there's more Irish than my remarks. And I wish you well, and Germany will have it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Colm Ó Riain. Fáilte an roimh seo go Berkeley, or as they say in Dublin, how are you all doing? I do have a question just before we start. There might be a few things that might be easier to express in Irish sometimes. It would be good for us to know what level of understanding people have from 0, I haven't a clue what you're saying, to 10, I know everything you're saying. Can we have a sense of that? As in, if everybody put up their hands somehow, give me a level. Right. Okay, that's great. You got a sense? Thank you. Caoimhe Maoilreánaigh, Robert, and the Consul General for all the work you do for us here in the Bay Area and all along up and down the West Coast, and Eric Calchi and Julia Nelson and Catherine for having us here, hosting us. We'll probably do it mostly through English, is my guess, but we'll throw in a few words. And thank you all, our Irish cultural ambassadors all, for travelling from far and wide to join us here today. Just to set the scene, I was in Brittany a couple of weeks ago, playing at this superb inter-Celtic festival in Lorient, which is the biggest festival of Irish Celtic music across the world, and I was very struck by how people were talking about the Irish. We were very much the kings of the Celts. They said, "Oh, you've got it worked out. We should follow what you have done," as if, you know, in Brittany and Cornwall and Wales and Asturias and Galicia, that they were going to follow what we had done to solve the endangered culture language problem. So we're here today to discuss whether we actually have solved it, and if we haven't, what we're doing to solve it, I hope, and if there are actually physical or concrete things we can do even here in the Bay Area to solve the problem here in this technological centre. So basically, after centuries of under threat, the Irish language is arguably on the rebound. And we're going to explore how this has happened and what more we can do to bring this about. So I want to introduce the various members of the panel at this point. Because Irish people, and people are associated with Irish culture, don't like to talk about themselves. I'm going to talk about them briefly, and if you have anything else to add or modify, you feel free to do so. On my left here is Imelda White, a native of Ardra, County Donegal. She has taught Irish in the Bay Area since 1979. She taught at the Irish Cultural Centre in San Francisco, the Celtic Studies program here at UC Berkeley, the Special Language program at Stanford University. She has travelled to places like Butte in Montana, Portland, Oregon, Olympia, Washington, and Los Angeles to teach Irish language total immersion workshops. Imelda White.
Thank you.
Has spent the last 10 years working as an Irish language multimedia reporter for Ireland's national broadcaster, RTE, from which she's currently on a sabbatical. She has reported on Ireland's domestic news for North, RT4 and TG Cahir. as well as international stories including terrorist attacks in Europe, the Greek bailout referendum, and a Brexit referendum in the UK. All very...
Whoa, serious. I've done happy stories as well.
Next up is Mike Klemme, a geek, self-identifying geek in Gaeltacht. He's a full-stack product engineer and creator of Love.irish. Recently, right?
Last night.
I signed up this afternoon. I must be one of the first members then. Yeah. An online Gaeltacht, open to everyone interested in Irish. That means you. Okay, so that's Love.irish. He has been teaching himself Irish for a little over a year and is using technology to make learning Irish easier and more accessible to all skill levels. Mike Klemme. Anything else to add to that?
No, that's about it.
Kevin Scannell on his left is Professor of Computer Science at St. Louis University. His main interest is the development of technology that helps speakers of indigenous and minority languages use their language online, with a particular focus on Irish and other Celtic languages. Would it be fair to say you're also interested in most minority languages?
Yeah, I work with a lot of different groups.
Kevin Scannell, all the way from St. Louis. Tom Fitzgerald, born in Kerry, in the Gulf of Cortagena, who was educated in Ireland, the US, and the UK. He is owner of 3 companies, employs writers in several countries as well as in Irish Gaeltachts. Litríocht.com, which many of you will be familiar with, his award-winning online Irish language bookshop was founded in 1999 and has customers in 66 countries. Tom Fitzgerald. Anything else to add to that, Tom? We can talk. And then finally, Pádraig Ó Maoilreánaigh has helped set up Folklore Gaeilge Berkeley, Irish-English language dictionary online, and provided data for the grammar database for the online dictionary and language library, developed by Forrest McGailge in parallel with the New English-Irish Dictionary product. And those mighty tomes over there are his version, his standard Irish verbs book and recent supplement. Right? Pádraig Ó Maoilreánaigh. I'm going to start off with a general question from a kind of high point of view. Caoimhe, I'd like to ask you first. Why Irish? What does the language and culture add to the world?
I suppose for me personally, it's a huge part of my identity. I was brought up in Gaeltacht, Wingleacht and Gidor. My mother is a fluent Irish speaker from Gaeltacht on the Farste. My father was from Donegal town. He didn't have any Irish. So I'm the eldest. My parents made a conscious decision when I was born to bring me up in Irish. Now it would be the easiest thing in the world for my dad to speak in English to me, because he obviously didn't have any Irish. But I suppose he valued the language, he valued where we were situated. We were in the heart of the Gaeltacht, and he knew that it would add something to my upbringing. So I'm hugely, hugely grateful for what it has given me. It's given me a career. It's very much a part of who I am. And I suppose I moved here a year ago, having spent like the whole of my life living the Irish language through my childhood, went to college, studied Irish, and then worked for 10 years with Multimedia teaching Cahar reporting Irish with Irish-speaking colleagues. So I suppose when I moved here, I was afraid I'd lose some of that. But with technology, WhatsApp, I phone home every day. I speak in Irish to my mother. I've met a lot of the Irish-speaking community here at Imelda, and Katrina down the back of the room were one of the first people I met here in San Francisco, and it gives me a sense of being at home, even though I'm so far away from home. And as well as that, when I open my phone, social media, most of my feeds are in Irish, my content is in Irish, so I don't feel like I've lost anything.
Tom, I'm curious what you yeah, it's the same.
There's a couple. I had the good fortune to be brought up as Gaeilge in West Kerry. When I was 10 years old, I was shipped off to my aunt in February of 1962, and I came back 6 months later, and my grandfather had been in bed for quite a number of years. He was very ill. I remember walking in to talk to him, and I couldn't remember my Irish. And I distinctly remember at that moment in time that I said, that will never happen again. I just remember that as just a key moment in my life where I said, I am not done with the Irish language. I moved to an English-speaking area. The other one that, other sort of a crucial event in a sense, I was in Alaska working on the Alaska pipeline, and there were 3 brothers there from Connemara, and I knew they spoke Irish, and I talked to one of them, and I said, Wingleacht, and he said to me, I don't want to use an expletive, he said, I don't speak that language, it's the language of the effing poor. And it just struck me, you know, we have this thing going on, and when I was in San Francisco, I set up a class in 1981, and we just had this tiny ad in the Community College of San Francisco bulletin, and I thought to myself, no one's going to show up. I went in there thinking I was all ready for 93 people.
Wow.
93 people. So you have this amazing contrast. You have this amazing contrast. And that's something like we sometimes forget, sort of living in Ireland, is the sheer power of the Irish diaspora and the love that they have for the language. And I think that's crucially important. Beyond that is the idea that the language itself is different. In English you say, I am sad. You never think about it. I am sad. In Irish you say, Tá brón a run. In other words, there is sadness upon me. So conceptually in your mind, in Irish, if you have sadness upon you, you can simply remove it. In English it becomes one with you. That's the kind of little nuance that is critically important, and thousands of those things we should hold on to.
I just want to make it clear to those who do not understand that Irish, Gaelic, and Gaeilge are all the same thing, in case you're thinking they're different things. We're going to probably use them interchangeably here. Kevin, I'm curious, as a professor and a student of language in general, what do you think Irish as a language adds to the world?
I'm glad you asked the native speakers and the Gaeltacht speakers first. In my experience, the people who have the most to lose when the language goes away are the people who are the native speakers. So I work with a lot of minority language communities all around the world, and of all the languages I work with, strangely enough, Irish is probably the best situated in terms of strength of language and the number of speakers and so on. So a lot of the other communities I'm working with are down to their last handful of speakers, and what they're struggling with is, who are we as a people now, or who are we as a people when the last native speaker dies and goes away? What does it mean to be Hawaiian? What does it mean to be Lakota? What does it mean to be whatever the language group is, if that language isn't there? Can you be fully Irish if the language isn't there and we play Irish music and there's Irish dance and all of that? Is it really the same thing? I would say not, but I think that's the main thing we have to lose.
I grew up 20 years later, maybe than you, Tom, and I grew up in an Irish-speaking household in Limerick, which is not known as a Gaeltacht area. But I remember being made fun of in my school for learning Irish, speaking Irish in the 80s. And I think that's changed a bit now. I'm curious, Caoimhe, I'm curious do you think there's a resurgence of Irish amongst younger generations, and is that exhibited through the television and radio?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was growing up, there was one programme on Bridging the Gaeltacht for young people. It was called Lurabag. Other than that, I can't remember having any other resources. You look at young people today, they have podcasts. You've got TG Carr, which wasn't there until 1996. As well as that, you have, I suppose you have the Gaeltacht area, but outside of the Gaeltacht area, you have the whole Gaelscoileanna. So for anyone who doesn't know, it's they're Irish medium schools, so it's immersion education. So you've got this new generation of young, confident Irish people coming out of Gaelscoileanna. They're very aware of who they are, and they're not apologetic for speaking Irish. So you've seen things like Pop-Up Guiltacht, which has been hugely successful all around the world, not just in Dublin. It started in Dublin, but all around the world. I attended one down in LA just last year. So you Pop-Up Guiltacht, you have Nagéid Óga, which is a GAA club in Dublin, set up to give young people an opportunity to come together, play football, ask Gaeilge. So all of these things help normalise the language, which is really, really important.
Imelda, as a teacher in the diaspora, how have you seen it change in your time?
Well, first of all, I grew up in a Gaeltacht area. We didn't speak Irish all the time at home, but when I went to my grandparents, it was all Irish. Then I left Ireland, went to Germany, learned to speak German, lived in Germany for 9 years, taught my children German, they were born there. We came back to Palo Alto. I sent them to German school on Saturday mornings to learn German. Nothing about Irish whatsoever until I discovered that there was a class in progress at Stanford University. It was taught by John Morrissey, that a lot of you know. He's still teaching a class in Palo Alto. And he grew up in New York, and he wanted somebody from Ireland. He heard that I did speak Irish. He wanted somebody to come into his class to work with the students, and so he said, give them an authentic accent. And so finally I went over to his class. He held it at his home in Palo Alto. The students rode their bikes over. And I thought, this is amazing. The last thing I expected to be doing in Palo Alto. So we gave up German, and the kids took up Irish dancing, and I took up Irish teaching. He made me encouraged me to set up a class in Mountain View at a church. The church had a school building that they were very generous and let us use a room. And so we went in there and we taught Irish for every Monday night for 17 years, non-stop. There were no football fans in our class. And so, and then we moved into having ceilidhs, having sing-songs, and we branched out because so many people came for music, for dancing, for literature. And we had a lot of, in Mountain View at that time, when guests from Ireland were coming to Berkeley, Sean O'Toole, Nulini Gona, this lady, I just found this the other day, Deirdre Davitt. She came over, she was at Berkeley. They all came down and paid a visit to the class in Mountain View. It was absolutely fantastic. So time went by, and what happened? I went to work full-time doing something else. And I taught for a while. After John Morrissey stopped teaching at Stanford, I took over his class there for a while. Then I worked at Stanford myself, full-time in administration. And so recently, the people in San Francisco didn't have a teacher, and they invited me to come up to teach at Coltis on Saturday morning. So I've been doing that for about eight or 9 years, I think. I stopped last year. Caoimhe ag Dalaníis. Agus ní bhfuil am chumant Turas Fada. So I don't like to drive long distances anymore. So there's another wonderful teacher now at the Center in San Francisco. Berkeley had a tragedy here. They had a wonderful Irish language teacher that had the misfortune of passing away, and I stepped in and finished out the year for Eddie Stack, a beloved teacher. So that's how I ended up at Berkeley. And I would have continued again. It was a 4-hour commute every day. Killed me. So just last year, a young student requested a class at Stanford University again. And they called me and asked if I would be willing to come in and teach the class. And I said, yes, it was much closer to home. It's only a 10.
How do the students now compare to the students 17 years ago? Are they looking for different things?
Yes and no. They are, first of all, they have many more resources. They can do a lot of research on their own, although we have better materials for teaching. When I started here, with all due respects to all of the old wonderful textbooks, like Buntus Concha, Learning Irish, and so on, now we have much better materials now, and online materials, and AV in the classroom, and there's been a variety over the years. I've had some students in the early days that were very serious, that went on into teaching themselves at a level much higher than I think I could have taught them. And they continued to write to me, and the writing kept getting better and better. There was one man in particular. And in the local community, a lot of people came for music. They were listening to Irish music, Irish songs, now they're sean-nós, and they love it, but how do you learn it? How do you learn how to pronounce the words? And I was able to do that. I'm not a singer by any means, but I can teach them how to pronounce the songs and keep the beat. And they go off happily singing. So, I don't know if that answered your question.
I would actually bring, because Mike, you've taught yourself taught Irish with technology. I'm curious, this is a nice segue to how you've done it.
Yeah, it's basically been using all the resources, so Duolingo, Kindle books, YouTube, TG Chapter, just like full immersion. Yeah, and it's just been like every day, not really focusing on like, I do not understand this, but just slowly building up the vocab.
So clearly there's a lot of tools out there. I'm curious, maybe Tom, you have an idea, have something to say about what is being done to pass it, what is being passed on from your point of view as a Gaelic speaker. What do you feel, how does the language that is being passed on that you hear, for example, on TG Chapter now, compare to what you grew up speaking?
Well, I'm afraid my friend in Glasgow was somewhat correct. He left Connemara, and when I was a kid, there was certain perception in our local big town, which was Dingle, that those who spoke Irish were poor, and we were very poor out there. And now, certainly the last few years, the Irish language, particularly with the growth of the Gaelscoill since I think 1974 or so, the Gaelscoill have done a huge amount in Ireland. I was chairman of a Gaelscoill for 7 years in Bantry. And these kids, I mean, it's actually the reasonably well-off parents that send their kids to learn Irish. They get a better quality of education. There has been a better understanding of the fact that growing up bilingual, and in Ireland your best chance to be bilingual is Irish. I mean, some people have meant that we should be learning French, Spanish or whatever, but Irish is taught in all of the schools, somewhat reasonably well and sometimes not so well. But the Gaelscoill, those kids, we used to talk to them all the time. They know the language and they're comfortable with it as a spoken language, and that's the major difference. It's kind of moved out of being these poor enclaves. The challenge for us is to keep the Gaeltachts themselves alive. And that's a challenge that I tried to take on 20 years ago when I started my company in the Gaeltacht. And that's where sort of the two came out of not being able to find books in San Francisco when I was teaching here. I used to have to go home and try to find books that my aunts had used in school 30 years before. It was extremely difficult to find books. Now that problem's pretty much been solved, not just by Literature, but by other companies as well. So the opportunities are there. The challenge, I think, to a great degree, is the Gaeltacht itself. If we can keep the Gaeltacht alive, if we can keep meaningful jobs in the Gaeltacht, and there's a lot of really, really smart people in the Gaeltacht, and to provide them with something that will allow them to stay there. They don't necessarily have to be jobs as Gaeilge. They just have to be jobs, and that's the thing. We're now getting Ballingeary, for example, we get broadband in there for the first time in 2003. First village in Ireland, Gaeltacht or Gaeltacht, that got broadband. And people appreciate having that access to the world, and it gives them more opportunities. So that's like, there's opportunity and there's risk.
The survival and the development of Gaeltacht, I mean, the role of the government in that has been much discussed. I'm curious what anybody, maybe Caoimhe, and we'd have something to say about what the government has done in the past and what you think they're going to do in the future and what role you think that has.
I suppose, building on Tom's point, like the Gaeltacht, the survival in the Gaeltacht and the economy really go hand in hand, because without an economy you don't have a Gaeltacht, without jobs you don't have a Gaeltacht. In my own home place of Gweedore, I think it was in 2016, 2015, 20 young teachers from the area left and went to Abu Dhabi to teach. So
Not Irish, I presume.
not Irish, no.
The Abu Dhabi Gaeltacht, you heard it here first.
They brought the Irish to Abu Dhabi. So that has a huge effect on somewhere like Gweedore.
Right.
So I suppose the government launched their 20-year strategy in 2010, so that brings us up to 2030. But with any strategy, it has to be implemented and you have to have the proper resources behind it. As well as that, you have to have services in the Gaeltacht for it to survive. So you need doctors with Irish, you need teachers with Irish, you need guards, policemen with Irish. There was a story in the media, I think it was last week, about Inishmen, one of the Aran Islands, Gaeltacht region. They didn't have an Irish teacher on the island. So that has a huge effect on any Gaeltacht area. So the other thing I would say as well, the government can provide all these services, all these supports, but it takes the community as well. You have to have buy-in from the community. And I see at home, I see couples, both Irish speakers, who raise their children through English. So I don't know how you counteract that. That's very, very difficult because the pull of English is so strong. It's all around. So I think the Gaeltacht as a community, we have to take responsibility for survival ourselves, as well as supports from the state and from the government.
I noticed in Brittany, when the French government gives something like €6 million a year to the Regional Council of Brittany to support the culture. And I don't even know the numbers for the Gaeltacht. Does anybody here know what kind of money the Irish government puts in?
Approximately, I think the budget for Údarás and Gaeltacht is somewhere around 8 million
A year.
a year. Yeah.
It's fairly
There's a
tight.
significant decrease
It's been
in
higher.
the budget
It's been higher.
over the last number of years.
So given that, what do you feel the health of the Irish language and the Gaeltacht is compared to 25 years ago?
Worse.
Worse? Yeah. Okay. Kevin, relatively, and you have some objective thing. Where do you think, what do you think the role of private enterprise would be in this? Actually, Pádraig, I'm curious what you make of this, of all of this, where you feel the language is going and the culture is going.
Well, I'm very much a proponent of books, as you can tell. One of the big problems that we have with computers, I've been involved with computers for almost 50 years, working for Hewlett-Packard with my own company and several other companies. One of the big problems is that, and I hate to say this, but almost everything that can be put on the internet can be compromised. The other problem is the changing formats, the changing media. When I started the Gaelic or the O'Donnell project and put it on computer, the Wingleacht project, that was in 1980, just a few years after the FGB was first put out. And
What's the FGB?
sorry, that's the Folklore Gaelic of Ireland, which is the O'Donnell Dictionary, the Irish English Dictionary.
Online.
No, this is the book that I started out with, and I actually started typing it in. Then I actually got permission to purchase the typesetting tape from an English company, ironically, to print the first version of the O'Donnell Dictionary. So I started out with that, and we first got it translated from an one of the big 12-inch tapes to floppy disks. the 5¼ inch floppy disks that had capacity of 300 kilobytes or 360,000 characters. And it took 19 of these disks to hold the entire dictionary. It's about a little bit over 6 megabytes, or 6 million characters, if you will. From there, we started to develop all kinds of programs to actually take this data and put it into a form that could be usable. Well, that took several years. I got involved with a man named O'Doherty, Dr. O'Doherty. He was a professor of Celtic Studies at in Aberdeen, not in Aberdeen, in Scotland anyway. Anyway, we got things going, and the point I'm trying to make is that over the years, the media has changed, the data formats have changed, and it was virtually impossible to keep up with it. You put something on DOS, you get it all working, get it all pristine and everything, and everybody's happy with it. Then they changed the Windows. Windows 1.0 went to Windows 2, wasn't compatible. Windows 3 wasn't compatible, so I had to recompile everything. Not only that, in some cases I had to buy a new compiler in order to make the code that the computer understands to make that work. So then in order to distribute this thing, you went from floppies and eventually up to a CD, which has a capacity. And they changed the Windows. Windows 1.0 went to Windows 2, wasn't compatible. Windows 3 wasn't compatible, so I had to recompile everything. Not only that, in some cases I had to buy a new compiler in order to make the code that the computer understands to make that work. So then in order to distribute this thing, you went from floppies and eventually up to a CD, which has a capacity of 680 megabytes, and then DVD. All of that stuff is going away. So now everything is distributed on a thumb drive. They've already obsoleted essentially thumb drive version 2, the USB 2. Now it's 3, and they have another one proposed for 4. So now anybody that puts something online, for instance, they put all this money into developing an app, let's say, or developing a program. They have to be prepared for the possibility that in 2 years or 3 years from now, it's not going to be compatible with the previous or with the new version of cell phones or the new version of computers. So anything that you do online, you have to be prepared to support this and to change it as the media changes. And so I find it rather frustrating. I had the Wingleacht program working very, very well in Windows XP. Come to find out that Microsoft had changed the way that executables work, which meant I had to go buy another $1,200 compiler. And now it turns out that the actual code that I have is not compatible. So now I have to go in and change all the code in order to make it compile, just to get it to the point where I can debug it. I'm just a word of caution that I'll say another thing too, that the Gutenberg Bible was first published in 1455, and that for somebody that's conversant with the old German text can still read that. Somebody will be able to read this hopefully in 500 years. But I guarantee you that even 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, what you put on the internet may not be compatible with what we have today. So it's a long-term commitment to keep up to date with everything that's going on.
Kevin, where do you think Irish fits in the current landscape of translation? And obviously translation is a big issue. Maybe we should discuss that first, whether translation is a good idea in some ways for a language.
Translation in principle, or machine translation?
Either, up to you.
Okay, so translation is very important. I think there's bilingual policy in Ireland, so all of the official documents, and it's an official language of the EU now, so all that material that's produced by public bodies is translated and available to Irish speakers. That's part of the services that are available to Irish speakers. That means if you're interacting with the healthcare system in Ireland, if you're interacting with the post post office or whatever, you're supposed to be able to do that through the language, and that means translating a lot of things. So I'm fully in support of that. There's a big change coming with the status of the language in the EU in a couple of years, where it's going to become a full working language, and that means that the amount of capacity that the language has to have in terms of the number of translators and the number of documents that are going to have to be translated is going to go way up, which means recruiting more people with good language skills, and also that sort of segues into the technology part, because it's going to mean improving the technological resources that are available to translators to get their job done. One of those technologies, so there's Google Translate, for example, is available in Irish. It's been around, it's probably been 7 or 8 years now that's been available. Professional translators aren't putting the material from Google Translate and then editing the output, presumably. Probably most of you have toyed or tried Google Translate. The quality has gotten better over the last 8 years, but it's still not producing anything approaching the quality of a professional translator. The impact that that's had, just the existence of this technology, and I'm a technologist and a programmer, so I'm fully in support of these things, but what it's meant in practice is that it's done harm to the language, and it's done harm to the people who are seeking out services, because we have story after story of road signs and documents and websites and people that are trying to meet their constitutional obligation to the language by putting material through Google Translate and just putting it up online. And what that means is...
Could you give us an example or two?
Well, so I'm speaking tomorrow, and I'll have some nice pictures of road signs. I collect pictures of road signs that people take traveling around Ireland. Often they'll post them on Twitter, things that have been clearly translated by Google Translate. I have just incredible exampls.
I think the Irish government had a web page that they had done through Google Translate.
Yeah, the 1916 commemoration site, when it first went online, there was an English version and then also an Irish version that in the initial was just Google translated. This is for something with great kind of historical significance to the culture and so on. So they've made some excuse that it was a placeholder until they could get the thing translated by a human being and so on. But it's little stories like that that appear over and over that mean that the bodies that are doing this, or whoever's doing it, they're not meeting their obligations to the Irish-speaking community in terms of providing services.
Yeah. Tom, as an employer of many translators,
we actually, I mean, when in some ways, when Eamon O'Keefe became Minister for the Celtic, it was kind of a golden age in Ireland. I know Imelda, were you there? You weren't there at the time.
When was that? The 90s?
By 2003, I think it was, he passed the Irish Language Act, and it also coincided at the same time where it became an official language of the EU. So on the translation side of things, I hired a bunch of translators, and we did work for both the Irish government and the EU, and we translated tens of thousands of documents. And as time went on and the downturn of 2008 came, basically the government no longer had any money, and they started doing things like Google Translate to meet their legal obligations, okay? So that went away. So I would say, and we had a quick conversation about that earlier, I lost some of my translators to Brussels. So if you're looking for a job and you have your Irish down really well, they pay 80, 90,000 a year, and you get 45 vacation days, and it's just a wonderful time that you can have.
I'm very tempted.
Just to encourage all of you to learn your Irish and get a job in Brussels translating.
It's only 80,000 euros a year, right?
I said that jokingly, because there's no way you could pay that in the Celtic, but I assure you,
Right.
But it was a great opportunity, and a lot of really good things happened. There were problems with signs as well. Some of you may or may not know, I'm from the Dingle area, and a well-intentioned rule came in that all Celtic area towns had to be named Australia, right? And no English translation. And that created absolute havoc, because the maps did not reflect it, And so people were like, the Dingle put up the biggest fight, and they finally got it in dual languages. But like, there's all these ideas, they're really well-intentioned ideas, and they don't necessarily work. But I think at the base of the whole thing, I really think we got to keep the Gaelic itself alive. We really, I mean, it's going to be very difficult. The very things that are so wonderful that we're doing online and social media and everything else, those same things are coming in English into the Gaelic. When I grew up, we barely had radio, and there weren't all these television programs and everything else that was coming in English, so I didn't really learn English until I was 10. Nowadays, everyone speaks English and Irish at the same time, which is, in a way, but it's also potentially problematic. I mean, will the language survive in the Gaelic? It's doing reasonably okay. The Gael Scannell are doing a terrific job, and I think that's changed certainly the perception of the language as not being the language of the poor. Poor Colm never realised that I'd be quoting him 30 years later, you know. But not being the language of the poor, being the language of people who are culturally informed and want to maintain something critically important.
There's I don't know if any of you have heard of El Sistema. It was a system of teaching music that started in Venezuela in the 70s. And they were aiming at the poor communities. And one of the founder, he was an economist and politician, one of his mottos was, the culture for the poor should not be poor culture. And it drove the whole thing, so they have music halls and facilities that are state of the art, because they said, this is how we get. But I'm curious, given we're talking about new initiatives, Mike, you have set up an online Gaeltacht as of yesterday. Why?
Why not? It's kind of like there's like a family kind of feel to the Irish language. Like when you start learning, you're part of this community. The reason why I'm actually building the site is, you find little pieces online, TG4, and then it's just bringing all of that into just like one app. So that people who don't live in the Gaeltacht could actually speak Irish every day. And kind of just like learn more, dive into the culture, wear it, earn it, live it.
I'm curious whether, because Tom, one of your objectives for this meeting and maybe later on tonight and in the coming weeks and months is that we do something here in the Bay Area. And I'm curious there, for example, Skype has allowed women and men in Guatemala to have conversations, Spanish-speaking conversations with people here in the United States, or all around the world, learning Spanish. I'm curious, is this in your plans? So for example, could you have people in the Gaeltacht, in County Greenland, teaching people in America, just through conversation, 1 hour at a time?
I have a million ideas for the app.
Tell us.
Yeah, so starting with music videos, I guess media, so TV shows, guides. It's just kind of like my background is in tech, so taking that and figuring out what are the things that can help me learn, because I'm about 6 months in, I would say, a year total, but 6 months of actual lessons. My mom, who I will teach after I learn. So it's looking at what helps me get over that little hurdle of I got the basic 1 through 10 lessons in Duolingo, but if I can't break through that wall of why are the things changing? Why is lenition happening? So it's taking that and building things that you can slowly build up the cognition of that. So for me, it's just building tons of tools to make it easy to engage with people, so you can live across the world but have a conversation like your old friends. And that's what it will really take to live it when you're not in an Irish-speaking community.
Yeah, so about 15 years ago we set up an online website that might be of interest to you called gaeltalk.net. The idea was we put a certain amount of lessons online and then we hired people to actually teach the lesson. And a story that you might enjoy was that I was in the local shop in Ballingeary and we're talking Ascailga, and this old guy started a big argument about whether it should be Scolmuda or Scolbuda, the name of the local school. And I said, Tádraig, why don't you come over and teach Irish with us? You're so interested. And he said, yeah, but has to be must be Irish and nothing else. Listen, I don't care, Tádraig. Any Irish you want to teach is fine as long as people learn it. So Tádraig ended up teaching, he was like 78 at the time. He ended up teaching Irish to people in Montana and people in Arizona and people in Australia online. Now, the reason that you love this one, the reason that Tádraig stopped teaching, he was 82. He was still teaching, but he was around the age of 80. I walked in one night and he was talking to some lady in Montana, and he kind of walked away, and I said, you didn't get off, well, she's just talking. I said, she's talking Irish or English? She says, English. I said, well, aren't you gonna, no, she just keeps talking. Anyway, to make a long story short, the same lady who was just talking to Tádraig showed up in Ballingeary about 6 months later. Tádraig is, remember, 79. And then about 6 months after that, Tádraig goes to Montana. This lady comes back to Ballingeary, and the next thing they get married. And Tádraig is like 80 years old and married. So one of
matchmaking service.
Pretty much. I had suggested maybe what we should do is set up, maybe you can do that now, like set up something called clownist.ie or something like that.
If anybody has any questions, by the way, please feel free to ask them. They come up and just let us know. Imelda, as a teacher of Irish, what role do you think these websites like this have in teaching the language?
I think the websites are extremely important. We have lists, we give lists of them to our students. Various students utilize them in different ways. Depends on, there's a website out there to suit every learning style. I would like to hear from some of my students who are still using their, like Carol, or what are you using at the moment? We did TEG, T-E-G, the government that gets you up to leaving cert. We used that course.
Since you asked, Katie and I are, we meet once a week and we're using BIPAX.
Yes, that was another excellent one. And so there's a lot of excellent ones in it. And I find that the students are the greatest researchers when they get out there, because they're sincere and diligent students, and they find a website that suits them best. I personally don't spend a lot of time on the websites, but they will come and tell me this is what works, and then we'll take time out on corrections and discussion. And yeah, there's online learning is critical.
And I'm curious, maybe Peter, you could talk about this. Much of the drivers of Irish culture, I mean the two big ones, the obvious ones, are language and music and dancing. And what do you think when you separate those, or maybe websites don't necessarily need to separate them, and Mike, you already put songs on that have been translated into Irish. I'm curious what role you think the Irish music will have on language going forward.
I think it's all very connected. For example, I was in Brussels about 3 years ago. I reported on a story there, and one of my interviewees was a local guy from Brussels who had no connection whatsoever to Ireland, but he was a musician, and he was really familiar with Altan and Klemme's music, and they come from the same area where I'm from. So he said he listened to the
same
music.
pub, in fact.
The same pub, my local pub, Leo's Tavern. So he listened to their music, and he was really, really interested in the language. So from that, he started learning Irish. So by the time I interviewed him, he was fluent. So I think the two are very, very connected, like especially where I'm from. Cador is really, really rich in its musical heritage, and that really has its roots in the language. So I don't think you can really separate the two.
Pádraig, do you have any ideas as to the role of, and there's the other role on the other side of scholarship? How do you feel that scholarship is going these days in terms of the development of Irish language and keeping some of the old forms solid?
Oh yes, I think it's very important. As a matter of fact, starting to get involved in another project to try and get some of the older dictionaries like the Mean and T. O'Neill Lane and so forth, get them into the system and then connect them. We were talking about this just a little bit ago, and connect them to the new language. There's about, I don't know what percentage it is, but there's a percentage of the Benin dictionary that did not get transferred over into the O'Donnell dictionary, which was a replacement. And if that's left the way it is, all the material that wasn't transferred over is going to get lost because it's in the old font and it's the old shape and so forth. I've developed a font specifically to do that, and to do both of them, and so that you can actually go from one dictionary to the other and see what the old. You could even do that for the even Old Irish. It's fairly rarefied.
And what words were left out? Was there any plan, any rule by which they left them out, and they didn't, or was it just randomly they just?
Well, I think it was a space issue. If you look at the font in the Deneen dictionary, it's quite a bit smaller than the one in the O'Donnell dictionary, and then there's 1,300 pages in both of them, and the size of the font is about 60% or so, which means that there's approximately 60% more material in Deneen than there is in the O'Donnell dictionary. So I would love to see the Deneen. We were talking about a program called Tesseract, which it's an engine that can be used to actually take and do character recognition in the old font, and that's something I think is very important.
One of the reasons I'm interested in this, my grandfather was a writer, and he wrote some books in the very beginning of the setting up the Irish Free State, and he wrote in the Scannell Club in the 20s and the 1930s, and I was using Tesseract and an object, a character recognition system that Kevin worked on, and we had some problems. So, but Tesseract, tell us about what you think the state of the art currently with character recognition of the Scannell Club and the Newer Club, in fact.
So there are solutions out there that let you get Scannell books, for example. So I'm on one of the editorial committees of the Royal Irish Academy's historical dictionary. I'm translating into English here, the Folklore Staru Belga. And part of that work involves trying to, there's a huge amount of books that were published, especially after 1922. In the sort of Free State, they had a whole movement to try and translate a bunch of literature and create material, reading material for the soon-to-be 100% Irish-speaking public in the 1920s and 30s. So there were huge amounts of books translated during that time, and also a lot of literature produced, but it was all typeset in the old font style. And until 5 or 6 years ago, that was all essentially locked up and not readable electronically. Part of the work of the historical dictionary has been to scan a huge number of those old books. And I don't even know, it's hundreds and hundreds of books that they've scanned at this point. All that material is then digitized and then published online. So their website, I think it's corpus.ria.ie. If you go there, it has a searchable database of hundreds and hundreds of full-text Irish books from that period that have been scanned and are now searchable and readable.
Has the development of Unicode, has that helped?
That's helped for sure. With Unicode, if you want, you can actually render the texts using the dotted consonants and so on. There were crazy things we did to get around. I've been learning the language for 20-something years, but even as late as the 90s, it was difficult to type fadas on the computer. Even if you could type them, if you tried to send them across the internet or email or something like that, they would come out broken on the other side.
I had, so for about 6 months, about 5 years ago, I was sending texts to my dad and never answered, ever. I thought, okay, then maybe they're not that particularly interesting. I'm living halfway across the world, so maybe. And it turned out, anytime I put a father in the text, he would never receive it. And he wouldn't get a message saying, you did not get a message from your son. And then I discovered he was on a Nokia, and they just ignored it. Any message with one father, dead.
It happens. Unicode's been around since 1991. It solved most of the problems, but there's still legacy systems out there. I was just having an email exchange with a friend about the difficulties he's having his name recorded correctly in the health services database in Ireland with the fathers.
There's a compatibility problem all the time.
It is, and the excuse is that the systems are legacy systems, which really means that they're not as old as 1991, but the last time they deployed them, they didn't care enough to produce something which handled languages other than English correctly.
The irony is, even when we translate it into English, we put an apostrophe instead of a father, we create similar problems because almost all computer scripts use apostrophes as end delimiters on strings. So much so that as a result, my dad gets stopped at airports by Aer Lingus. They won't let him on a plane because he's got an apostrophe in his name. How many Irish people have apostrophes in their name? And Aer Lingus stops him getting on a plane. Right? So what Aer Lingus can't solve is problem. Anyway, Tom, I'm curious what you think we can do. We're here based in the Bay Area. We've got a ton of talent and expertise. Is there anything we here in the Bay Area can provide that will keep graphics going or drive the language and culture?
Well, a lot of what's going on at this, people at this table, and possibly I hear that we don't know about in this audience, is exactly the kind of stuff that is needed. And what we need to do is to find a way to work together, you know. So if we can find a way to work together and connect with one another and then link up with the organizations in Ireland. I mean, it's, if you're like the word bureaucrat, if you're working for one of the organizations in Ireland, you're not necessarily connected. When I was starting the Wingleacht, and I went to Dublin to 1999 to try and, I discovered the books in 97 that they were there, that there were thousands and thousands of books there that weren't getting over here at all. And I went to the people that ran the place for the Irish government and I said, look, what kind of marketing are you doing? And they said, oh, tá Pádraig sa bhuaist an le phone póca. We had Pádraig in the car with a cell phone. I'm like, okay.
The PR department.
Marketing. And what about Emerita, the US? Because I had been teaching US, I actually talked to Imelda before that as well down Mountain View. And we were having a tough time getting books, weren't we, Imelda? And you know, when you tried to teach Masil Dov, as I did in one of your classes, Masil Dov I was using as one of my books to read. And when, it was Jameen actually, that was a funny one. Jameen gave whiskey to the gambler. You know that? So Jameen gave whiskey to the gambler. In Ireland, that's hilariously funny. You know, he tried the whiskey, didn't like it, put it into the gambler's food, and the gambler got drunk. So in Ireland, that's very funny. In Palo Alto, that's curly down.
So is this the kind of problem you think needs to be solved?
Well, in a way, part of it is, the problem is, when I talk to people in Force Gael or Fordham Gael as it then was, they had no conception of online selling. So we need to be communicating this stuff that's happening right here at the table with people in Force Gael, with people in Untitled, with all of the Irish language bodies. If we can get that communication going, a lot of these organizations, they do have money and they do want to get things done, but someone has to come to them with a viable solution that will help them to get it done. So I think, going back to say, we need to work together. I mean, I was talking earlier about, you know, LA doesn't have teachers. The Irish government, Irish agencies can help these things to happen. And we can help them to help us, and we can help them as well.